Thank you all for being here today. Today, we're going to talk about telling your story through data as part of our Building Programs That Last series. All right. Okay, so as we get started, I'm going to go over our standard disclaimer. This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred. All right, and before we get into content, just want to acknowledge your program officers at the Office of Indian Education. I know Linda is on with us today, but definitely want to shout out all of your program officers. And today, for your facilitators, you have myself and Doris.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
So as we get started, I want to ground us in the purpose of today's session. We're here to rethink what evaluation can be. So not just a tool for compliance, but a way to generate insight, build relationships, and support meaningful action. So our first goal in today's session is to shift how we see data, moving from counting things to understanding what really counts. And then we'll walk through a 5-step evaluation story arc using a fictional program so you can see how purpose, questions, methods, analysis, and action can come together in a way that feels rooted and relevant. And finally, we'll take time to reflect on your own data stories, and then you'll continue to think about your data stories in your upcoming talking circles as well. All right, before we dive into methods or metrics, let's start with a bigger question. What is a data story? So when you hear that phrase, what comes to mind? For some of us, data might bring up spreadsheets, charts, or reports that we submit. But data also includes the voices of our youth, the shifts we see in confidence, the stories shared in a circle. Data story is the full arc, not just the numbers, but the meaning behind them and the change they represent. So in this next part, we're going to pause and reflect. How do we define data? What counts as evidence in our communities? And how do we feel about collecting and analyzing data honestly? And so your responses will help us reshape the story we're telling and the way that we tell it. And this is situated in that continuous improvement cycle where you see examine and reflect. Okay, so you should see a poll pop up shortly. Like I said, we're going to begin by reflecting on our relationships with data as they are now. So if everyone could please participate in that poll, we'd really appreciate it. You should see 4 questions. And you may see questions where you really want to choose more than one answer, but we ask that you just narrow it down to one answer for now. And there are no right or wrong answers, just a reflection. Thank you. I see people submitting their polls. We appreciate that. I see a lot of useful and meaningful or neutral, so that's good. No unclear, confusing, or stressful or overwhelming next. Ooh, Nadine, that sounds really cool. I'll have to read that. Awesome. Thank you all for your participation in that. I'll share the results so that you all can see how people felt about each of these things. Awesome. Okay, so now that we've reflected a little bit, I'm going to have us discuss briefly as well. So take a moment to think back to a time when you were asked to report data, such as in your APR, and reflect on how that data connected or perhaps did not fully connect to the story you wanted to tell about your work. The data you report is directly tied to the goals, measures, and outcomes you set at the start of your project. And while reporting is a requirement, it is also an opportunity to showcase your progress, celebrate achievements, and highlight the impact you're making. So as you're reflecting, consider, did the data capture the depth of your work? Were there aspects of your story that numbers alone did not convey? How could you strengthen the link between your measures and your narrative? So we're starting here because this discussion can surface ideas for making data more meaningful and representative of your project's impact. And you can kind of carry that with you as we get into our fictional example and walk you through the data story arc. And so as you can see here on the screen, the question that we will discuss is what made the experience that you're reflecting on feel disconnected. So think of a time when data was used in a way that felt disconnected from your actual work or impact. And what made that experience feel disconnected? Was it the type of data you're collecting? Was it how you were talking about the data or reporting the data? We would like 1 or 2 people to come off mute and share, and then we'll move into content. And it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically connected to this grant or grant reporting, but just a time in one of your positions or in your work where you felt like the data you were being asked to collect or asked to report was disconnected from what you wanted to really represent about your work or your impact.
This is Dee.
Hi, Dee.
Hi. I guess just how to get the people that are reading our data of like the full experience of the students that we work with. Like, I know everybody has issues, everybody has struggles, but to be the first generation of their family, to come from a broken family and succeed at a non-traditional students, but coming back just to show their grandkids that education is important. In Indian country here in Blackfeet, education has been divided because of our boarding schools, and but we can't tell the full story of the individuals of like where they came and the struggles that they've been to, and now they're where they're at now is just amazing stories. If we're able to do that in a full, each student would probably have to have 3 or 4 pages, and they give us a little paragraph to tell your stories. But you don't know, I mean, if you only knew and see where we live and where we come, or where our people come from, and the struggles that they have overcame, and now they're doing a full circle. Now there are instructors here at the college with me, and they started in our program. So it's just really hard to like take that data and explain it in details of the thing. So the data didn't really reflect the success, yes, but the stories that not just one but several of our students overcame to be where they're now.
Thank you for sharing, Dee. Yeah, I think this story is so important, and that context is so hard to capture in a lot of the methods maybe that were given to express those stories. And then Sally, I see you put something in the chat as well. In my experience, the lack of comprehensive data made the story I wanted to tell feel disconnected. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we don't always document things that could really help to round out the story. And sometimes you don't realize that until you're trying to tell the story and you're like, wow, I wish I had, this kind of data, or I wish I had captured this, which is something we'll talk about today. Okay, so Buster, I see you had your hand up. Did you want to share?
I did. Buster Atterbury, I'm the Karuk chairman out here in Northern California. So we're in transition right now. We're our education director, Scott Azeltine, is moving over to our language coordinator, and we're flying the education director position as we speak. So I can just kind of relay the message of what I hear. It's the burdensome application process and reporting process that that hinders the for grants. I think it's a bit of disrespect for tribal sovereignty. We know what we're doing, and to kind of streamline the reporting process and expediting the application process would be helpful. The other thing is I just stepped down this year. For 10 years, I was on the subcommittee for TBIC, co-chair for the education department. I think we could get more data on the students that attend public schools. The last report I had, 93% of students Native American students attend public schools. So there's been conversation at those meetings on how we can, what we can do to help the Native American students attending public schools. Or is there an opportunity to reopen the tribally controlled schools? There's been a moratorium put on that way back when. And I know out here with the Karuk tribe, we have a real opportunity to collaborate with our public school system and establish a tribally controlled school and use the existing building that's here. So more conversation or data on students attend public schools and the application and reporting process. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you all for sharing. I think, really great points, for sure. And so today, as we talk about data stories, we're really talking about bringing two worlds together, so that evidence and narrative. So it's not just about the numbers we collect, which, sometimes it might feel like that given the methods or requirements or what type of data maybe you have available to you. But it's about what those numbers mean. And I think we all understand that, but communicating that to other people is sometimes a challenge, as we brought up. We also want to know whose voices are reflected in the data, what they tell us about where to go next. So a data story connects dots on a graph to real people. So as Dee was talking about, like, there's so much context that can be missing from data sometimes that really shows the full picture of growth, and not just success, period. But data stories also, they help funders, partners, and community members see the full picture. And you need all of these different stakeholders to see the full picture, and not just the output, but that full impact, as Dee was sharing, as Sally was sharing about comprehensive data. And when we combine measurable outcomes with community voice, it's not only more accurate, it's more powerful, which is really important for a lot of these groups, whether you're talking about funders or community members. The stories that you tell and those stories being powerful is really helpful to garner support behind your program. So strong storytelling, especially when paired with clear visuals, can move people. It can unlock resources, build trust, and advocate for what our programs and communities truly need. So now that we've reflected on how data can feel disconnected or deeply meaningful, and types of data that could potentially feel meaningful or might be missing, we're going to walk through a 5-step evaluation story arc that helps bring purpose and clarity to this process. And the 5 steps that we're going to talk about today are define, ask, collect, analyze, and improve. And so each one builds on the next, guiding us from why we're collecting data all the way to how we use the data to make change or communicate. And then we will get into, after we talk about these steps in this process a little bit more broadly and generally, we're going to get into a fictional program, which you have seen from other webinars, other bundles. So if you watched the pre-recorded webinar prior to this, we walked through with the same examples. So that way, hopefully it's easier for folks to follow as we kind of layer these pieces on with a program. So you'll see how this approach can center insight, cultural relevance, and community voice rather than just making sure you're checking a box. So as we just discussed, and as we discussed in the previous webinar, this is that quick reminder of the evaluation process. I'm just going to briefly go over it more broadly. If you saw the other webinar, then we really dive deeply into each one of these. And if you didn't, we will provide the playlist at the end of this webinar if you want to go back and see any of the other ones and get some more information on this component before we dive in to the program application. So the 5-step evaluation process that you see here is define, ask, collect, analyze, and improve. And these 5 steps give structure to how we reflect on our program's effectiveness. They guide us in understanding what's happening, what's working, and where we can grow. But here's the shift we're making today. We're not just going to use these steps to evaluate for compliance or reporting. We're going to use them to build a story. And so today is about how we transform this framework into communication, something you can share with your tribal council, with funders, with your youth, with your community members. So instead of us diving into each of these steps again, as we have on a previous webinar, we're going to build on them. And so this session, as we get into the second half of this session, is about creating meaning and momentum from the data that you've already collected. So as we move into this portion of the webinar, we're going to bring that 5-step evaluation process to life with a fictional example that many of you have seen before, like I said, the Red Willow Learning Circle. This is a fictional program based on the work that we've seen from many of your communities. It focuses on Native youth, grades 7 to 12, and blends cultural learning with career exploration and leadership development. Red Willow wanted to build a program that felt rooted in tradition, but also prepared students to lead in today's world. As they moved through the evaluation arc, they didn't just collect data for the sake of reporting. They used each step from identifying needs to reflecting on results as a way to guide and adapt their program. So as Doris walks through this example for you, she's not just going to show you what evaluation looks like on paper. She's really going to get into how it becomes a tool for decision-making, storytelling, and sustainability. And so I encourage you, as you listen to Doris move through this next portion, to think about your own programs and what data do you already have? What stories are waiting to be told? How could this framework help you sharpen the way that you present your work to others? And so in the next few slides, Doris will dig into Red Willow's actual data and storytelling strategies. But for now, just keep this evaluation process in mind. And I'll turn it over to Doris.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you so much for setting such a great foundation as we reflect and dive deeper into how we evaluate and tell our story with our fictional program. So before I begin, we're gonna drop a PDF in the file in the chat for you. And as we're going through, this half of our presentation today, I'm gonna stop and point out exactly where the PowerPoint slides can, well, they'll mimic in our worksheet PDF today. So, in your PDF at the top, it's talking about, snapshots or data snapshots. So we're going to start there, but we're going to revisit our Red Willow story and just kind of talk about how we can take this data and take it from data points, from, APR collections to making it a story. So, what did Red Willow's data already tell us? So we already know that 55% of students completed their learning goals. The youth voiced strong cultural connection and leadership interest. But today, we're going to explore how we can present these insights in a way that moves others to listen, support, and act. We're no longer asking, what does the data say? But we're asking, how do we present this data so others can feel it? They can understand it, they can support it, they can raise awareness, they can retell your story, get more participants, recruitment, so on and so forth. So like Casey said before, we're going to think about this like a bridge. Data is our foundation, but we're also going to bridge it to storytelling and how we can cross it to connect with others. So we're going to use Red Willow for the remaining of our talk today and just explore different presentation methods, different messages, different angles for messages, different formats, and how we can really bring this data to life, and depending on who we're talking to, what it will sound like, what it will look like. So the biggest question we're going to ask is, how would you tell your story to a leader, to a community member, to a group of students, and so on and so forth? So we're going to start off with this really quick snapshot. We won't spend long on the slide because you've all heard this in the previous webinars, but just a quick snapshot to bring Red Willow back into the room. So I just ask that you remember that, 55% of the students completed, we saw that in the evaluation session, right? And so it's not just a number, it's part of a bigger picture. And so today we're going to analyze it again and really point out and kind of talk more like, what do these numbers mean? How can we show it again? How can we talk about it again? Really, we're going to dig deep into, what's underneath the data. And so we're going to think of this as our storytelling material going forward. And so moving on in your worksheet, in your snapshot, after you talk about your snapshot data, you put in those numbers on your PDF. We're really going to talk about who is the audience for, who is it? Who is your data for? And we're going to talk about each audience, what they value, and kind of how to, perfect your story angle on depending who you're talking to. And I feel like here's the part we often forget, not everyone needs to hear the exact story the exact same way. I like to think about it like you're cooking. The ingredients may be the same, but the dishes change based on who's at the table. If you're cooking for your parents, you're cooking for your kids, you're cooking for your loved ones, you know what they like and you know what they don't like inside the dish. And so it's going to change every time you cook it. So just moving on through the table, if you're presenting to the tribal council, they might care most about, cultural strength, youth wellness, long-term community outcomes. So your story might emphasize identity, tradition, leadership development. A really great way to say is, students are reclaiming leadership rooted in tradition. It's a really great way to angle your story talking to tribal council. Moving on to funders. Funders want to know if their investments are working. They'll want to hear about outcomes, innovation, sustainability. You can still include numbers, but anchor them in results. For example, 55% completion shows impact, and here's how we're growing. Moving on to parents. Parents love to hear about how this program is helping their child feel seen. Are they feeling hopeful? Do they feel connected? So I highly recommend with parents and families using more quotes and visuals. Your students are building confidence while gaining skills. And especially if you're talking to youth, when you're speaking to the youth themselves, make it about them. Highlight their growth, their choices, and their power. Maybe say, this is your journey. This is your path. This is your story. This is your experience, giving the responsibility and that ownership back to them. And so this slide just shows you how you can map out your data story in a way that meets people where they are, which makes your story more likely to be heard and remembered. Just checking the chat. Thank you, Nadine, for dropping that comment. Really great, advice and suggestions in the chat. So we're also going to talk about storytelling mediums and how to share the Red Willow impact. And so once you know who you're talking to, you can sort of figure out how you're going to share your message with them. And this is where you can get really, really creative. Maybe it's a short impact report with data and quotes, or maybe it's a poster campaign at a school with youth photos and testimonials. What if it's a short video with your students narrating what they did. It could be a flip book, it could be a zine, it could be artwork, it could be more stories. So once you collected the data, there's different avenues, different ways to collect it just outside of your APR. So the point that we're trying to make is you don't have to be boxed in traditional reporting. If you're going to a tribal council meeting, maybe it's a slideshow and photos, and you're bringing students along with you. If you're applying for a grant, you might lead with a really great clean one pager and supplemental visuals. Choose the story that reflects the spirit of your program and your community's ways of sharing knowledge as well. It's what's the best way you want to share your data? What's the best way you've collected it and it feels the most, honorable and reflective of that? And we're going to talk more about that later on in our time today when we break out into breakout rooms to share and try to step outside the box of traditional reporting. You guys, we all know we have our APRs, our APR updates, but the story doesn't have to stop there. It could go well beyond that as well. And so we're just gonna, as we're moving through your worksheet today, it asks you to talk about a pitch practice. What would you say if you had 2 to 3 minutes with a potential funder or a leader? And so this is where we really get to practice. So let's imagine that, you're at a conference. We all love going to NIEA, or we all love going to ACES, or taking our students to SACNAS, going to different conferences around the US. What if you bumped into, another tribal leader or a funder or a parent or a family? What would you say? How would you, pitch your program in a way that brings together identity, your numbers, and your vision in a tight, powerful way? So we put together our own Red Willow pitch practice, and I'm going to read it. And I just ask that you kind of take out the really short snapshot points that you could use in your own pitch practice. So at Red Willow Learning Circle, Native youth are reconnecting with their land, their culture, and their future. Through job shadowing and community mentorships, they're learning how to lead in health, governance, and environmental stewardship. In our first year, over half of the students created personal learning plans. We're seeing stronger identity, confidence, and career direction. This is about more than workforce development, it's about belonging. So that's our pitch practice for Red Willow. It's not just about, we ran a program, here's a stat. It's about our youth are reconnecting. We're building futures rooted in culture. So it really brings the story back to community. It brings it back to here's what we're doing, and here's why we're doing it, and here's why I think that you should support us. So what would you say? How would you talk about your program? Bring it back, and how would you talk about it, pitch it forward, get others to join. We're gonna challenge you to do this in your breakout rooms as well, with each other. And so I just wanted to put some data story formats for you on the screen. Just some, out of the box, non-traditional ways of reporting your data, what it can actually look like to tell this story. You could create a one pager, you could do a zine or a flip book, community talking circles as well, a poster exhibit at your, powwows, your tribal events, even audio recordings. Our communities are getting more into, radio, podcasts, interviews, and just allowing our community members to have that opportunity to share their stories, or even infographics, email newsletters, creating a website, social media. So the goal here isn't to add to your work. It's just to find ways to tell the story that makes sense for your audience, your team, and your community. We like to think about what you already do in your community to build from that and to just make it larger for raising awareness and telling your story. And so a part of your worksheet as well is we talk about talking points. Talking points are your cheat sheet. Do you have, talking points in your tool belt that at any moment you could just bust out and, talk about it and pitch your story? You don't always have time to prep a presentation, but you always have a few messages in your back pocket, right? And so this slide gives some examples with tribal council. You can emphasize your cultural leadership and future generations. If you're talking to funders, talking about your results, your next steps. When you're talking to youth, making it more personal and empowering. And so we ask that after this session, you just take 5 minutes to fill out your worksheet and kind of talk about the top sentences for your top audience. Really ask yourself, who's your audience? And it'll help you feel a lot more confident when you're writing, your data and you're sharing your data and you're introducing your data to other audiences and platforms and community members. You'll have these as your cheat sheet, in your back pocket when someone asks you, tell me about your program. And so this is going to segue us into our larger group discussion is where else can your story travel? And this is going to be a really great point to end on because your data stories deserve to go way beyond and further than just your APRs. Think about what other places, your community gathers. What spaces do your youth look up to? And where are decisions made? Where else can your story and your program travel? You might share your story at a college night, during a youth summit, a tribal gathering, a local newspaper, social media. These are really great opportunities to remind people of the good work you all are doing. You all are doing this great work every single day, 24/7. Being a project director is just not something that you clock in a 9 to 5. I'm pretty sure everyone here is a project director 24/7. And so we want to make sure that your stories and all the hard work you all are doing travels. Is it, your local radio, partnership meetings, community gatherings? And so our next session activity we're going to do is just a larger group discussion. And just, we love to ask you, when you think about your program, imagine one new audience who hasn't heard your story. What's one new place that you could share your program this year? And we would love to hear from you to come off of mute. Tell us what's one new place that you would love to share your program this year or plan to share it after our time today. Newsletter. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you so much for that. Anyone else have ideas of what's one new place you could share your program this year? Thank you for that, Lisa. The Color of Education Conference in North Carolina. How do folks on the call use social media? Facebook. Awesome. Through your tribal organization. Nice. Okay. These are really great avenues that you guys are all your border town school boards. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good idea for those that participate and interact with your school boards. Regional educational leadership meetings. Awesome. Awesome. These are really, really awesome suggestions and places that you guys can take your stories to. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Thank you everyone for dropping your ideas into the chat. And so as we segue into our time together, just for you guys to all share within one another, we just wanted to kind of talk more about and just give a new way to think about data as data being a seed. You know, data is a seed. Think of a really tiny, tiny seed, you know. It's tiny, it's unassuming, but it's full of potential. Data can be the same exact way. When you plant the data in the right soil, you know, you plant your stories in the right soil, it grows into action, it grows into future change, it grows into sustainability. And so we like to think of, you know, data is medicine in our hands. So we want to close today and return to this idea that data just doesn't have to live in a spreadsheet. Data lives in our youth. It lives in their confidence, in the languages they're reclaiming, in the strength of relationships they're building with mentors, with elders. You know, it lives in the cultural knowledge they're carrying forward, in the futures they're starting to imagine for themselves. You know, when we ground our evaluation work in the community voice and purpose, data becomes more than a reporting requirement. It becomes a tool for our communities. It becomes a tool for learning, for advocacy. So we're not just counting outputs. We're not just counting GEPRA measures and project measures, but we're counting a story. We're telling a story that only you all can tell. And so we want to allow that to be our last type of idea and point that we really want to home today is it doesn't just live in our spreadsheets. It lives well beyond that. It lives in those, you know, those tribal consultation meetings and your partnering broader sharing circles. It lives in your leadership meetings. It lives in all of these new places that you all have dropped in the chat. So we ask you today, what stories do you carry? And we're going to spend some time to just talk more about and reflect now that we reframed data as something that's living, something that's powerful. We invite you to reflect what's a data story that you are proud of, one that captured real impact and not just numbers. You know, what's a story you wish you could tell if you had the time, the resources, or the methods to capture it. So we ask that you think about something, you know, reflect if you want to take time and write it down, jot it down, because we're going to break out into breakout rooms to share what's one data story that you are proud of. So we'll take these 2 minutes to reflect on these questions. Feel free to go off camera, you know, sit and think, journal if you're a journaler, and we'll be sharing this after our reflection time in our breakout room. Awesome. So now that we have, you know, took some time to reflect and really thought about what is one data story you're proud of, we are now going to break off into pairs or groups of 3 to discuss the data stories, you know, talk to each other about what was it that made it a really proud story for you. Was it the way that you collected your data? Who was involved? And we really want to really ask how it was shared, so that way that we can share amongst each other new ways that we can, you know, push our stories forward as a community. So we're going to open the breakout rooms now, and it'll be in pairs, or you might have, you know, 3 people in your room, and we will post this screenshot of the slide for you in the chat before you go. But we'll be in the breakout rooms for about 10 or 15 minutes, and we just ask that you are prepared to share back some brief highlights when we come back into the main room. So I'm going to ask one of our team members to open it for you right now, and we are really excited to see and hear what you guys discuss. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for diving into your conversations. I know 10 minutes can go really fast, so I apologize if we cut you guys off in the middle of a really good conversation. Now, I would love to hear from a few groups. So who would like to start us off?
Brenda can start us off.
Okay, I guess I was voluntold, so I could start. So in our group, we shared about we have 3 different types of grants, and one was about instructional leadership, building instructional leadership, and supporting teachers with curriculum and pacing guides and planning. And we also had, that was Marie Rose from Rough Rock that talked about that. And she said that she's seen a lot of success because a lot of times school principals don't have the capacity to really meet the criteria that are needed for the instructional planning when they're bombarded with a lot of leadership things and admin things that come their way. So the grant has really allowed them to focus on improving instruction and providing teacher support through professional learning. So I thought that was really great. And then we also had, I'm really bad with names, but the other grant dealt with higher education and growing your own teachers to not only be able to teach in your community, but also just getting them to become licensed teachers that can come back and support in the community. And a lot of that is just teacher education and preparing teachers to come back and play a critical role in the community and be a part of the support system, and then just watching them grow. And then I shared about our 2 success stories for our Native Youth Community Project Grant. One is our youth council. So we have a 9th through 12th grade youth council that meet monthly. And it's been really exciting to watch our students grow and develop leadership skills. They have actually presented to school board members on their proposals of attending conferences, but they've also created presentations that they could share with their peers. And just watching the leadership skills that they've developed over the years of our grant has really been not only inspiring, but also is one of those feel-good things, like, you know, you're making a difference for these kids. And some of the ones that have graduated from our youth council are doing some really amazing things. Like one is in the military. A couple right now are actually pursuing higher education and enrolled in college education programs. So just a lot of great things going on. The other success story that I shared dealt with our para pipeline, which is growing our own too. So we have 10 paras that are working towards their teaching credential with their grant as well. And so it's really exciting to see that, and we're getting more interest. So we have just 2 years of left on our grant, so we're hoping to recruit more and utilize all that funding. So that's all that we have to share. Thank you for allowing us to share.
Of course, thank you. Those are some really good stories and small successes that are going to create some awesome change for you guys. Anyone else like to share? Maybe it's a student quote, a small success, or a lesson learned in your group?
Good afternoon. I can share that in our room, we were both working with NYCP grants, and we were talking about partnerships between the school systems and university systems. And data story that I'm currently proud of with our grant is that we have high school students who have worked through the programming of dual credit classes, which are classes as part of a pathway to help them move into the teacher pipeline that would prepare them for the education program within a university system and then moving into the teaching profession. And so with that, they're also working through a program that provides them mentorship from a university, meaning it's mentors who are pre-service educators at the university level. So students themselves about to become teachers. They are the mentors supporting these high school students. So they're receiving the coursework at the high school, they're receiving support within their high school work on that pathway to become a teacher. They've graduated from that program at the high school level. And we can say that the data story we're proud of then, as a result, is that 3 of our students have now entered into college to become an educator. So in addition to all of those who have entered into college for other wonderful programs, we actually have 3 now in the teaching pipeline at the university level. Another data story I hope to be able to tell soon, as it's currently in development, is that the university is finding such success with this partnership with our school, our local public school, that they're already talking about sustainability and how they can make this public school a site, a recurring site, a steady site for student teaching placement for their students. And so beyond the life of this grant, this would just be a standing partnership between that school and university, and keep this going in a slightly altered format from the existing way it's happening right now, but basically keep those dual credit courses in place and add to that then the standing student teaching placement.
Awesome. Congratulations. Thank you so much for sharing so much. Thank you. Do we have any more stories or some successes that we want to share or talk about how you plan to share that data? Any PD grantees, STEP grantees in the room?
I guess this is Dee again. I just want to share that that just being teamed up with the University of Montana Western, it's about 400 miles from our college, and we offer our classes, their classes here on our campus, but our students get to graduate over during their graduation. And probably the last 15 years, Blackfeet cultural, or just our native culture, was not really represented down there. And since 2016, our first graduates were in 2017, 18. And it was very, I guess, enlightening during graduation. They were allowed to wear their stand-up headdresses, and the ladies were able to come in their Indian outfits, their dresses. One of the stories that was really neat is one of the gals wore her grandma's elk dress during graduation because her grandma inspired her to go back to school and get her education. She did not think it was possible, being a mother of 5 and a single parent, and she walked across that stage very proud. So that was some of my highlight moments of, they struggle, but they get it done, and they were allowing them to wear that. And probably 20 years from there, we couldn't wear our eagle feathers on our hats. So it came a long ways.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dee. Thank you for sharing that. It adds a lot of, heart and story to today's conversation. That's all the stories and, successes that you guys are sharing is exactly the kind of stories that often get lost if we don't write it down. How can we report that? And so it's been a really great opportunity to hear you guys today. And so just as we wrap up today, we just wanted to leave you with a few more just reminders as you carry the work forward to revisit your evaluation purpose regularly. Use both your measurable outcomes and lived experiences. Pair your outcomes together, and make room for stories and art and culture to tell the full picture. And when it's time to share what you learned, make time for and space for those stories and creativity. Like we said before, we all have to do the APRs, we all have to do the grant reporting, but there's so many other opportunities and non-traditional ways of reporting that we can tell our stories, that we can think of data as storytelling. It's not just data, it's not just quantitative and qualitative numbers, it's not just filling out boxes. And so we really hope that today resonated, that you're able to take your worksheet to your team back home with you and reflect on how to share findings with the community, and not just with, you know, future grants, with future funders, but with each other, with parents, with youth, with teachers, with families, with future teachers, and many more folks to come. And so for Casey and I just really want to thank you for taking the time out to listen to us today, to walk through the worksheet today. It's been a really great time to think about data as storytelling, data as a way to communicate and not just a report. And so we wanted to end with a thank you, like I said, for taking time with us. You will also see an end of event poll pop up that will ask a few questions. We would really love that you answer that for us so we can better make our TA sessions more fun, interactive, and just full of really great knowledge. I also wanted to give you guys your program officer's contact information. If you want to have TA coaching, one-on-one time with your TA team, we have that as well in the chat for you. And I will pass it to you, Casey, to wrap us up for today.
As Doris said, thank you all for joining. We really appreciate your presence, your participation, and all of the great insight and stories that that you all share. And we look forward to hearing more insight from you all in your talking circles that are coming up. And then I'll go ahead too and put our information in the chat if anyone needs the technical assistance information. If you need us for any coaching, feel free to sign up at that Calendly link. If you have questions, you can email your program officers, you can email us. If you are NALRC or NALA Ed, your talking circle is this Thursday, and you'll have me again. So I look forward to that. Look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you all for today, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.